A young woman stood on the roadside after the rain, holding two German Shepherd puppies against her chest. Several cars had slowed just long enough to make Hope feel foolish. When an old truck finally stopped, she saw the man behind the wheel. Short hair, steady eyes, the quiet look of a Navy SEAL who had carried too much home from war. "You need a ride?" Reed Callahan asked. She tightened her arms around the puppies. "From you? That depends where you're going." She gave a bitter little laugh. Soldiers always show up after everything's already ruined. Reed looked at the wet road behind her, then at the puppies shivering against her dress. "Sometimes," he said, "we stop before it gets worse. I don't need saving. Good. I'm offering dry seats." She almost told him to leave. Then one puppy whimpered. Reed saw her anger crack just enough to reveal the fear underneath. So he opened the door. Neither of them knew the man she had run from was already looking for her. Before the story begins, let us know where you're watching from today. It's always beautiful to see how many places a single story can reach. Marin Bell stood beside the wet country road with mud soft around her shoes and two German Shepherd puppies pressed against her chest. Her simple farm dress clung lightly where the rain had touched it, and the hem carried dirt from the miles she had walked before the sky finally cleared. The road behind her shone pale under the late afternoon light, bending through fields that smelled of wet grass, old fence posts, and soil turned dark by rain. Several cars had slowed just long enough to make Hope feel foolish. A pickup eased down when the driver saw her, then rolled on after his eyes dropped to the puppies. An older couple stopped near the shoulder, asked where she was headed, and left after the smaller pup pushed its nose out and gave a thin, hungry whine. Later, another car pulled too close, carrying two young men with grins that made Marin's shoulders stiffen before either of them finished speaking. She sent them away with her chin raised. After that, she stopped lifting her hands so quickly. Anger came easier than fear, and pride felt warmer than begging. Biscuit, the rounder puppy, nudged her wrist with his damp nose, while Rue climbed higher against her, like the world might look safer from there. That was when Reed Callahan's old truck came around the curve. He was not driving fast. His hands rested evenly on the wheel, his eyes stayed on the road, and his face had the worn stillness of a man who had learned to keep pain from moving anything but his breath. The Navy called it mandatory leave. Reed called it being removed from the only life where silence still had a purpose. He saw her from a distance, a young woman on a roadside after rain, holding two puppies, as though someone might try to take even those from her. Mud marked the lower edge of her dress. Loose strands of hair clung to her cheek, and her eyes followed his truck with the guarded look of someone who had already paid too much for small pieces of hope. Reed's foot stayed on the gas a moment longer. He had trained himself to keep moving. Then Rue shifted in Marin's arms, and she bent over the puppy with a sudden tenderness that hit Reed harder than the scene should have. In that small motion, he saw a hospital room washed in white light, a phone call that came too late, and Elise's hand growing colder before he could get home to hold it. The truck moved another few feet before his boot found the brake. Marin did not come to the window. Reed lowered the glass and waited, letting the engine idle low between them. She looked at his short hair, his steady posture, the careful way his eyes moved from the road to the puppies, and back to her face. Her mouth tightened, as if she had already decided what kind of man he was. "You need a ride?" Reed asked. "From you?" "That depends where you're going." Marin gave a bitter little laugh. "You soldiers always show up after everything's already ruined." Reed looked past her to the empty road, then at Biscuit, shivering against her arm. The puppy's ears were too large for his head, and his body trembled with the kind of exhaustion no creature that small should have to understand. Reed's answer came without heat. Sometimes, he said, we stop before it gets worse. I don't need saving. Good. I'm offering dry seats. She stared at him for another long second. You always talk like that? Only when I'm trying not to waste words. That must make you popular. It keeps conversations short. For the first time, something almost like amusement moved across her face. But it vanished before it could become trust. She looked toward the road behind him, then down, at the puppies. Rue licked her thumb, and Biscuit made another weak sound against her chest. Reed put his hand on the gear shift. I can leave. Marin lifted her chin again, ready to let him. Then Biscuit whimpered. The sound was small, but it carried through the open window and settled between them. Marin looked down, and her anger cracked enough to show the fear underneath. Reed saw it because he knew what it looked like when a person ran out of places to stand. He opened the passenger door. Marin did not move right away. She glanced at the inside of the truck, at the floor mat, the empty coffee cup, the old ball cap tucked above the visor, then back at Reed. If you get weird, I'll jump out. Fair. And they bite? They have teeth? Some. Then I'll behave. She stepped closer at last, awkward with the puppies bundled in both arms. Reed reached over and moved an old field jacket from the passenger seat to the back without touching her or the dogs. If that small distance mattered more than anything he could have said. Marin climbed in. The truck pulled away from the shoulder, tires hissing softly through shallow water left in the broken edge of the road. For a mile, neither of them spoke. Biscuit settled against her lap. Rue kept one eye on Reed as if memorizing the enemy, and Marin watched the fields pass with the tense posture of someone who might still change her mind. Where am I taking you? Reed asked. Town. What part? The main part. There are several main parts. Then one of them. Reed kept his eyes forward. Bus station? Maybe. Friend's place? Maybe. What's their name? Marin looked out the window. You always question women you pick up off the road, only when they don't know where they're going. The silence that followed had weight. Outside, the last light spread over the wet fences and low hills, turning the puddles in the ditches copper. Marin rubbed one thumb over Biscuit's head until the puppy stopped shaking. I don't have anywhere, she said. Reed heard the effort it cost her. He did not look over too fast, and he did not soften his voice in the way people did when they wanted credit for pity. He drove another stretch before answering. You can stay at my place a few days, he said. Long enough to decide where somewhere is. Marin turned toward him. That's supposed to sound comforting? No, it's supposed to be clear. I don't know you. You'll have a room with a lock. I sleep downstairs. There's a phone in the kitchen that can call the sheriff if I give you a reason. She studied him as if every word might have a trapdoor under it. Are you going to hurt me? Reed's hands tightened once on the wheel, then relaxed. I had a wife. I know what it means for a woman to feel safe inside a house. His eyes stayed on the road. You're not my type of trouble. Marin looked down, hiding whatever that answer stirred in her. These two are trouble. I've worked with dogs that weighed 90 pounds and could take down a grown man. Biscuit sneezed into the crook of her elbow. So 2 puppies are nothing? She asked. Reed glanced at the small lump of wet fur in her lap, then back to the road. That's what I'm saying. Marin did not smile. Not fully, but one corner of her mouth shifted before she could stop it, and for the first time that day, the silence inside the truck did not feel like another door closing. Before we step inside Reed's quiet house and see what Marin and the 2 puppies bring into it, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. The old truck turned off the main road and followed a narrow lane between wet grass and leaning fence posts. Marin kept both puppies in her lap, one hand braced around Biscuit's round body, the other tucked over Rue's restless head. Every few seconds, her eyes moved from Reed's hands on the wheel to the trees beyond the windshield. as though she was memorizing the way out before she ever stepped inside. Reed noticed, but he did not comment. His house sat at the end of the lane behind a row of old oaks, solid and weathered, with a long porch and a wind chime missing one brass tube. The last rainwater dripped from the gutters in slow, uneven taps, and the yard smelled of damp leaves, warm wood, and the kind of silence that had been left alone too long. Maren stepped down from the truck with Biscuit, and Rue gathered tight against her, pausing before the porch, as if the house might change its mind about letting her in. "It's not much," Reed said. Maren looked at the wide porch, the clean windows, the empty chairs lined up like nobody had used them in months. "People always say that when it's more than they think." Reed did not answer. He unlocked the front door, pushed it open, and stepped back so she could enter first. Inside, the house was clean in a way that made it feel almost untouched. One mug sat beside the coffee maker. One coat hung by the door. A pair of boots rested straight beneath a bench, toes aligned with the wall. On the dining table, only one placemat had the faint wear of regular use. Maren saw all of it. The house did not look abandoned. It looked maintained by a man who no longer expected anyone to arrive. Reed set his keys in a wooden bowl near the door. Kitchen's there. Bathrooms through that hall. Guest rooms upstairs on the left. Maren stayed near the entrance. "You give tours to every stray you pick up? Only the ones carrying more strays." Biscuit chose that moment to wriggle hard enough that Maren had to tighten her grip. Rue pushed one paw against her collarbone and gave Reed a narrow look, as if deciding whether he belonged in his own house. Reed glanced at the puppies, then at Maren's muddy shoes. "I'll get towels." He returned with 2 old bath towels and a folded blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. He did not step close enough to crowd her. Instead, he placed them on the table, pointed toward the stairs, and kept his voice even. "Your room has a lock. I'll check it before you go in. My room is downstairs. I don't come up unless you call me, or unless one of those 2 starts chewing through the wiring." Farron watched him for a long second. "That's supposed to make me feel better. It's supposed to be true." That answer seemed to take some of the fight out of her shoulders. Not all of it, but enough for her to follow him upstairs. The guest room was small, plain, and aired out by a window facing the oaks. Reed tested the lock with the door open, then handed her the key without making a ceremony of it. Phone sat on the bedside table, old but working, the cord wound neatly beside it. "Kitchen phone works too," he said. "Sheriff's office number is taped beside it." Maren looked at the key in her palm. "You really expect me to believe I can call the sheriff from your house if you scare me? I expect you to know you can." She did not thank him. Her fingers closed around the key, and that was answer enough. Downstairs, she spread one towel on the kitchen floor and set the puppies on it. Biscuit lowered his nose to the tile, sniffed twice, then tried to walk and slipped just enough to sit down hard. Rue climbed over him without apology and headed straight for Reed's boots near the door. "That one's Biscuit," Maren said, picking up the rounder pup before he could roll onto his back. "He eats like somebody's always about to take the bowl away." Reed watched Rue disappear halfway into one boot. "And the criminal?" "Rue, because she jumps? Because she thinks every place belongs to her if she gets there fast enough." As if to prove the point, Rue backed out of the boot with one of Reed's socks in her mouth. Maren laughed before she could stop herself. It was not a full laugh, not yet. It came out small and rough, like a sound that had been stored somewhere and forgotten. Reed stood still, with his hands at his sides, looking at the puppy, then at the girl, sitting on his kitchen floor with rain-damp hair and dirt on the hem of her dress. For a moment, the house sounded different. Reed found 2 shallow bowls, filled one with water, and set a little canned chicken on a plate when he realized he had no puppy food. Biscuit attacked the food with solemn devotion. Rue took one bite, then tried to drag the towel toward the refrigerator. "I told you," Marin said. "You said trouble. You didn't say organized." She looked down at the puppies, and the humor faded a little. They've had to learn. Reed heard the shift and let it sit. He moved to the stove, heated soup from a can, toasted bread, and scrambled 2 eggs because that was what he could make without thinking too much. Marin sat at the far side of the table with her bag near her feet and the puppies under her chair, close enough that both kept touching her shoes. Reed placed the food down and took the opposite side. The distance mattered. Marin ate slowly at first, then faster when hunger beat pride. She caught herself, set the spoon down, and looked away as if embarrassed by the sound of her own need. Reed kept his eyes on his bowl. "Nobody counts bites here," he said. Her spoon moved again. The story came out in pieces as the evening settled over the windows. Her parents died when she was 16. Wade Bellamy, her mother's brother, took her in because there was nowhere else arranged, and because a judge had signed papers that sounded kinder than the years became. First, Wade called the farm a home. Later, he called every meal a debt. Marin did not tell it like a victim begging to be believed. She told it like someone sorting fence wire, one hard piece at a time. Up before dawn, feed runs, broken gates, laundry, supper after everyone else. No paycheck because family did not pay family, not when family had already done so much. Reed listened without interrupting. "You have ID?" he asked when she paused. "In my bag. You're 21? Last month. And the dogs?" Marin's eyes dropped to Biscuit, asleep now with one paw in the water bowl. "Wade says anything born on his land belongs to him." "Is that what you say?" "I say they'd be dead if I hadn't been feeding them." Her voice hardened, then thinned. "He said weak ones cost more than they're worth." The kitchen went quiet around that. Reed looked at the puppies, then at the girl whose anger had been built from too many mornings with no witness. He did not tell her she was brave. People said that when they wanted pain to sound prettier. Instead, he stood, rinsed the bowls, and opened a cabinet where old towels were stacked beside cleaning rags. "You and the dog sleep upstairs," he said. "Door locks from your side." Marin stared at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Night came with the soft creak of cooling wood and the distant sound of frogs rising from the wet fields. Marin carried Biscuit and Rue upstairs, and Reed stayed in the kitchen until he heard the guest room door close. A moment later, the lock clicked. He was glad it did. The next morning, Marin woke to find 2 small bowls by the kitchen door, a bag of puppy food on the counter, and a note written in square, careful letters. Rue tried to eat an electrical cord. "The cord has been moved before she wins." Marin read it twice. Then she looked at Rue, who was already awake and chewing the corner of the towel with unreasonable confidence. By late afternoon, the house had begun to rearrange itself around small noises. Biscuit sneezed under the table. Rue dragged a sock into the hallway. Marin washed her own cup and placed it beside Reed's, not touching his, but no longer keeping it far away. Near the end of the hall, she passed a closed door. There was no dust on the handle, but the air around it felt different from the rest of the house. Marin slowed, Biscuit heavy in her arms, and looked at the thin line of shadow beneath the door. She did not ask what waited inside. Some rooms told the truth by staying closed. The second morning came warm and damp, with sunlight spreading through the kitchen window and turning the dust in the air into tiny gold specks. Reed woke to the smell of coffee he had not made and the faint scrape of a chair leg against the floor. When he stepped into the kitchen, Marin was standing on that chair, reaching up to hook a loose curtain back into place, while Biscuit tugged at the dish towel hanging from her back pocket. Reed stopped in the doorway. "You know you don't have to earn breakfast." Marin glanced down without stepping off the chair. "I know. Then why are you working?" "Because Sitting still in somebody else's house feels worse. She pushed the curtain hook into the wall with her thumb and gave it a final tug. And because if you keep lining things up like a barracks inspection, this place may need civilian intervention. Reed moved to the counter and poured coffee into the mug that had been his alone for too long. Under the table, Rue dragged one of his socks into the shadows with the focus of a professional thief. He watched the small dog vanish with it, then looked back at Marin. Looks like the occupation already started. Marin climbed down from the chair, careful not to step on Biscuit. I warned you. You undersold it. That almost made her smile. The morning did not become easy all at once. Marin still kept her bag near the stairs, still turned her head when tires passed on the road outside, still answered certain questions with less than they asked for. But she moved through the kitchen a little differently now. No longer like a trespasser, more like someone testing which boards would creak under her weight. Reed fixed the back gate before noon. The hinge had sagged just enough for Rue to consider it an invitation, and Biscuit had already tried to follow her through a gap that was built for rabbits, not round puppies with more hope than sense. Marin stood nearby with a plate of toast she had burned at the edges, watching Reed work the screws back into the wood. You really handled 90-pound dogs, she asked. Yes, dogs that listened? Most of the time. Then why won't she? Rue sat in the grass 3 feet away, staring at Reed while ignoring the command he had given twice. Her ears tilted forward, her eyes bright with disrespect. Biscuit, meanwhile, had fallen asleep with half his body inside one of Reed's boots by the porch. Reed set the screwdriver down. Because she doesn't work for me. Marin looked at Rue. Smart girl. By afternoon, the house had collected noises it had not held in years. Puppy paws slipped on the kitchen floor. A cabinet bumped when Marin searched for a pan. The screen door opened and closed more than it needed to because Biscuit kept forgetting which side of it he wanted to be on. Reed noticed all of it. He also noticed the quiet places between those sounds, the moments when Marin's face emptied without warning. Once, while rinsing a cup, she stared through the window so long that water spilled over her fingers. Another time, Biscuit yelped because Rue had bitten his ear too hard, and Marin crossed the room faster than fear should make a person move. She was not used to anything small being allowed to cry. Later, while the afternoon heat pressed against the windows, Reed found Marin at the sink, watering the dead pot of soil on the sill. It had been there since the winter Elise got too tired to keep up with plants. The little clay pot still had a faded mark where her thumb had once pressed dirt down around basil roots. Marin must have seen him looking. What used to be in it? She asked. Basil. Yours? Elise's. The name landed softly, but changed the room. Reed did not look away this time. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, coffee cooling in his hand, and watched the empty pot as if it might answer for both of them. She liked growing things where they didn't belong, he said. Windowsills, coffee cans, old ammo boxes I told her not to use. Marin's hand stilled around the cup of water. She sounds stubborn. She called it practical. That's what stubborn people call it. A small breath left him, close enough to a laugh to surprise them both. Reed looked at Marin, then back at the pot. She wrote letters too, even when a text would have done it. Maybe she wanted something that stayed. He did not answer right away. Marin poured the last of the water into the dry soil and set the cup down. If basil grew there once, it might again. Reed stared at the darkening dirt. For months, he had kept that pot because throwing it away felt cruel and planting something new felt worse. Now it sat between them with a little water in it, not healed, not ruined, just waiting. Some things did not ask permission before they began again. The closed door at the end of the hall stayed closed through most of the day. Reed passed it twice carrying laundry, and once with a toolbox in his hand. each time slowing without meaning to. Marin never touched the knob, though her eyes found it whenever she came down the stairs. Biscuit had no such restraint. Near evening, while Reed changed a bulb on the porch, and Marin folded towels in the hall, the round puppy nosed his way through the door that had not latched tight. By the time Marin noticed, Biscuit was backing out with a cream-colored scarf clamped between his tiny teeth, proud as a dog returning from a successful hunt. "Biscuit," Reed said. His voice cut sharper than he intended. The hallway froze. Marin stopped with a towel half folded in her hands, and Rue pressed against her ankle as if the sound had struck the floor. Biscuit sat down, scarf still in his mouth, his tail slowing until it barely moved. Reed saw Marin's face change. Not much. She was too practiced for that. But the brightness left her eyes, and her body drew inward before she could hide it. He looked at the scarf, then at the puppy, then at the girl, standing in the hallway, as if one wrong breath might cost her the roof over her head. The anger had never belonged to them. Reed crouched and held out his hand. "Biscuit." The puppy released the scarf with a wet little huff. Reed took it gently, smoothing the fabric across his palm. It still smelled faintly of cedar and something he had spent months trying not to remember. "I'm sorry," he said. Marin blinked. He didn't know. "I know." Reed kept his eyes on the scarf for another second, then looked at her. "I wasn't saying it right." She did not rush to make him comfortable. That was one of the first things he respected about her. Instead, she picked up Rue, held her against her ribs, and looked down at Biscuit, who had begun licking Reed's knuckle like an apology of his own. "He steals important things," she said, "but he usually doesn't eat them." "Usually?" "Best I can offer." Reed gave the smallest nod. "I'll take it." That evening, the wind shifted over the valley. The air grew heavy before the storm, carrying the green smell of fields and the distant metallic edge of rain that had not yet fallen. Marin was drying Biscuit's water bowl when she stopped, eyes lifting toward the window above the sink. Outside, there was nothing but the old oaks and the fading light. Reed saw the change in her shoulders. A person could be laughing one minute and listening for danger the next. If danger had been patient enough in the past, he set his mug down without a sound. "You hear something?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. But her hand lowered the bowl with unusual care. Rue ran across her foot, and Marin bent to pick her up, holding the puppy longer than she needed to. The house had begun learning the shape of laughter, but the evening pressed close against the windows, and Marin's eyes stayed on the road beyond the trees. Some doors opened quietly. Others announced themselves with tires on gravel. The sound came at the edge of dusk, low and uneven beneath the weight of the air. Tires moved over the gravel lane, slower than a neighbor would drive, and heavier than the wind could explain. Marin was at the sink drying Biscuit's water bowl when her hand stopped over the towel. Reed heard it too. The house had begun learning the shape of laughter. By evening, the world outside had remembered how to knock. He crossed to the front window without touching the curtain. A faded farm truck rolled into the yard first, its tires grinding wet stone. Behind it came a sheriff's cruiser, white and brown, under the dimming sky, with a young deputy already looking toward the porch before the car had fully stopped. Marin stepped into the hall with Biscuit tucked against one side and Rue pressed high against her chest. The color left her face when the driver of the farm truck opened his door. Reed saw it happen before she moved, before she breathed, before the man even turned with the folder in his hand. Wade Bellamy was broad through the shoulders in the thick, worn way of a man who had spent years making work look like virtue. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his boots carried red mud, and his face held an expression that seemed wounded from a distance. Up close, the pain in it looked arranged. Marin backed half a step. "How did you find me?" Wade gave a slow, sorrowful shake of his head as if she had asked something cruel. He lifted his phone, screen still glowing in his palm. "Because I never stopped worrying about you, honey. You know that." Her eyes dropped to the screen. "The family locator," Wade said. "I kept it on because I had to. A girl like you out here alone, upset, not thinking straight. There are men who wait for that." His gaze moved to Reed and stayed there. Men who say the right thing and make it sound like kindness. Marin's fingers tightened in Biscuit's fur. The puppy squirmed once, then went still against her. Rue tucked her nose under Marin's chin, as though the small dog could hide them both. "I was protecting you," Wade said, more softly. "You never did understand that." Sheriff Tom Harlan stepped out of the cruiser with a hat in one hand. The careful face of a man used to arriving after a story had already been told. He was older than the deputy beside him, gray at the temples, with a calm that did not quite reach his eyes. The deputy stayed near the cruiser door, watching Reed's hands. "Mr. Callahan?" Sheriff Harlan asked. Reed stepped onto the porch. "That's me. Raid Callahan?" "Yes." Wade opened the folder before the sheriff could say more. "I told you. Same man from the gas station camera. She got into his truck yesterday evening, carrying my dogs." "They're not yours," Marin said. The words came out thin. Wade looked at her the way a tired father might look at a child making a scene in church. "Marin, don't start this out here." Reed moved one step down from the doorframe. The porch board creaked beneath him, and the young deputy shifted his weight in response. Harlan noticed. Her eyes flicked to Reed, quick and frightened, then back to Wade. Sheriff Harlan took the papers Wade handed over. Old guardianship forms. A copy of a death certificate, then another. A handwritten livestock and kennel record with several lines underlined. A statement in Wade's tight script saying Marin Bell had left the farm in an emotional state, carrying 2 young German shepherds from Bellamy property. The paper sounded dry in the sheriff's hands. Outside, the storm held itself back. "Marin," the sheriff said, not unkindly, "I need to hear from you. Are you safe here?" She opened her mouth. Wade sighed before she could answer. "She's embarrassed. That's what this is. She got upset, wandered off, and this man picked her up. I'm not accusing anybody of anything worse yet, Sheriff, but my niece has been through enough to make bad choices when she's scared." Marin stared at the porch floor. Reed watched her shoulders fold inward by inches. He had seen men under interrogation hold longer than that and break quieter. Wade had not raised his voice, and somehow that made it worse. "She's 21, Reed said. Wade turned to him. "And you knew that because you asked?" "I'm sure. You military boys always do things proper when a scared young woman climbs into your truck." Reed's jaw set, but he kept his hands at his sides. Sheriff Harlan looked from one man to the other, then back to Marin. "Did Mr. Callahan bring you here against your will?" "No," she whispered. The answer barely reached the yard. Wade stepped closer to her, not touching, only entering the space around her as if he owned that too. "Good. Then we can all be reasonable. You come home, you rest, and tomorrow we settle this when you're not so confused." Marin held Biscuit tighter. "I don't." "You don't what?" Wade asked, gentle as rain over a locked door. "Have money? A car? A plan? You think strangers keep feeding people for nothing?" Rue gave a small whine. The deputy came toward the porch, slow and cautious. Biscuit began to wriggle, his paws scraping at Marin's dress. The puppy twisted his head toward Reed, as if the house had already become a place worth remembering. Reed felt the railing under his palm. He wanted to step between them. He wanted to tell the sheriff about the locked guest room, the phone by the bed, the way Marin had eaten soup with one hand near her bag because she still expected kindness to change its mind. He wanted to say Wade's version of protection sounded too much like a fence. Marin lowered her eyes. That stopped him more sharply than any warning could have. If Reed turned the porch into a fight, Wade would know exactly what to call it. a dangerous veteran, a frightened girl, a rescue that became another kind of control. Reed could almost hear the story forming before anyone spoke it. So he stayed still. "Marin," Sheriff Harlan said, softer this time. "Do you want to go with your uncle tonight?" She looked at Reed once. The look was fast, ashamed, and full of things she could not say, with Wade standing close enough to hear her breathing. Then Biscuit climbed against her arm. Rue trembled under her chin, and Marin gave the smallest nod a person could give while trying not to disappear. Wade exhaled like a man relieved of a heavy burden. There now, Reed's hand closed around the railing until the wood pressed into his skin. The deputy helped Marin down the porch steps, though she did not lean on him. Biscuit fought the motion, turning back toward Reed with both front paws braced on Marin's arm. Rue slid higher against her shoulder, whining as the yard opened between the porch and the cruiser. Marin did not cry in front of Wade. At the cruiser door, she bent her face toward the puppies and moved her lips against Rue's damp ear. Reed could not hear the words. He did not need to. Some apologies had the same shape in every language. The door closed. Wade gave Reed a look that carried no gratitude and no surprise. Then he climbed into his truck. The cruiser backed out first, tires rolling over wet gravel, followed by Wade's farm truck, with the taillights glowing red beneath the low, bruised sky. Reed stood on the porch until both vehicles vanished beyond the oaks. When he stepped back inside, the kitchen still held Marin's towel over the chair. The basil pot sat damp on the windowsill. Two small bowls rested beneath the counter, one with a ring of water left at the bottom, the other pushed sideways, where Biscuit had nosed it after supper. The house had no puppy paws slipping across the floor now. No sharp young voice accusing him of arranging his spoons like a man awaiting inspection. No Rue stealing socks from under the table as if she had been sent to loosen every rule he owned. Reed told himself the sheriff had been there. He told himself Marin had family. He told himself a man could not build a right out of what he felt in his chest. But the silence around him had changed. It no longer sounded like the life he had known before she came. It sounded like a door he had watched close while his hands stayed empty. That night, the rain never came. Wind moved across the porch in long, low breaths, pressing at the boards until the old house answered with small wooden groans. Reed sat at the kitchen table with the lights low, two empty puppy bowls near his boots, and the cream-colored scarf folded beside his hand. He had brought it back from the hallway after the cruiser left, smoothing it once, then twice, as if cloth could forgive what people carried. House was quieter than it had been before Marin arrived. That was what made it worse. Before her, silence had been a system Reed understood. It held its place. It kept furniture where Elise had left it, kept the floor clean, kept his grief from spilling into rooms he could not repair. Now the silence had teeth, and every corner of the kitchen seemed to be missing a sound. A sock under the table, a water bowl scraped across tile. Marin's voice saying he lined up spoons like a man waiting for inspection. Reed stood so abruptly, the chair legs dragged hard against the floor. He went to the small drawer beside the pantry, the one behind a stack of insurance forms, unopened medical envelopes, and the kind of papers people kept because throwing them away felt like admitting the life attached to them was over. At the back sat Elise's wooden box. He carried it to the table. Inside lay her wedding ring, a few photographs, a folded pharmacy list in her handwriting, and a cream envelope with edges softened by time. Reed had seen it often enough to know every mark on it. He had lifted it in winter, in spring, after bad dreams, after command called, to check on him, and every time he had put it back before opening the flap. On the front, Elise had written one line, "For when you start mistaking silence for peace." Reed sat down slowly. After Marin and the puppies were taken away, Reed tried to call the quiet familiar. But that night, the quiet stopped obeying him. He opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin and folded twice. Elise's handwriting slanted slightly to the right, steady in the first lines, softer near the end. Reed stared at the first word for a long time before letting himself read the rest. Reed, if you are reading this, it means you finally stopped running from the quiet. I know you. You will blame yourself for not being beside me. You will turn this house into a post you think you have to guard. You will keep everything exactly where I left it and call that loyalty. It is not. A good soldier knows when a mission is over. A good man knows when another one is standing right in front of him. Do not spend the rest of your life protecting my memory from the living. Open the door, feed what is hungry, shelter what is scared. And when someone needs you, Reed, do not make my absence the reason you walk away. Come home all the way. Elise. Reed read it once. Then again. His face did not break the way people expected grief to break a man. No sob came out of him, no dramatic collapse, no hand over his mouth in the kitchen light. Only his shoulders lowered, inch by inch, as if the thing he had been carrying had finally shifted and left him sore in every place it had touched. He folded the letter with care. Then he put it in his shirt pocket instead of the box. Outside, the wind ran along the porch again. This time, Reed heard something beneath it that was not memory. A door left open. A girl who had not been asked the right question. 2 puppies carried back to a farm where weakness had already been judged too expensive. He went to the truck. The dashcam card was still in its slot, warm from the day's heat trapped under the windshield. Reed brought it inside, loaded the footage onto the old computer in the living room, and watched the road appear in a grainy wash of gray light. There was Marin on the shoulder, muddy hem. Both puppies held close, her body angled away from his truck until he spoke through the window. The next clip carried audio, asked the right question. 2 puppies carried back to a farm where weakness had already been judged too expensive. He went to the truck. The dashcam card was still in its slot, warm from the day's heat trapped under the windshield. Reed brought it inside, loaded the footage onto the old computer in the living room, and watched the road appear in a grainy wash of gray light. There was Marin on the shoulder, muddy hem, both puppies held close, her body angled away from his truck until he spoke through the open window. The next clip carried audio. You need a ride? From you? That depends where you're going. The footage did not make him look heroic. Showed her suspicion, his distance, the space he gave her. And the moment she chose to step closer, only after Biscuit whimpered. Later, the cabin microphone caught enough of the drive to matter. Reed asking where to take her. Marin circling around town, the bus station, and a friend that never grew a name. Then her voice came through smaller than before. I don't have anywhere. Reed paused the recording. The screen held her profile in the dim cab light, stubborn and scared, at the same time, one hand resting over Rue's back. He watched it until his own reflection appeared faintly over hers in the black edge of the monitor. He did not need anger yet. He needed facts. Marin's small bag still sat beside the stairs, left behind when Wade rushed her out with the puppies and old papers. Reed opened it, only far enough to look for identification, then stopped when he found a folded set of receipts tucked inside a paperback book. Puppy food, worm medicine, a cheap collar too small to last long, all paid in cash over several weeks. In the side pocket lay a scrap of notebook paper. Biscuit, morning, soft food, little water first. Rue, check pause, don't let her steal feed Twine. Under that was her old phone charger and a cracked phone with a nearly dead battery. Reed hesitated before waking the screen, then saw the messages stacked beneath Wade's name. Up before 5. Don't waste money on the weak ones. If you want to eat here, work like you mean it. Being grown doesn't make you smart. Don't make me come looking. Reed photographed the screen with his own phone and set Marin's things back exactly as he had found them. He did not read more than he needed. There were lines a man should not cross, even for the right reason. By morning, the sky hung low and gray. Reed drove to the sheriff's office with a letter in his pocket, the dashcam card in a plastic case, the receipts folded in an envelope, and Marin's ID where he could return it to her hand. He wore a plain shirt, not a uniform. He carried no weapon. The only thing military about him was the way he placed each item on Sheriff Harlan's desk in clean order and waited without filling the room with his voice. Sheriff Harlan watched the footage first. The young deputy from the night before stood behind him, arms crossed, at first, then lower, as Marin's voice came through the speakers. Neither man spoke when the clip reached the part where Reed told her about the locked room, the downstairs bed, the phone she could use if she felt unsafe. Harlan looked at the receipts next, then the messages, then Marin's date of birth. "She's 21, Reed said. "I see that. She needs to be asked when Wade isn't standing close enough to answer for her." The sheriff leaned back, rubbing one hand along his jaw. Morning light through the blinds cut pale lines across his desk. For a moment, Reed could hear the wall clock, the deputy shifting his boots, and a phone ringing unanswered somewhere deeper in the building. "All right," Harlan said. They reached Bellamy Farm near noon. The gate leaned inward on rusted hinges, and the grass along the fence had grown high enough to hide broken wire. A long shed sagged behind the house, its tin roof bent from seasons of rain and heat, and beyond it, a kennel row sat in the damp shade. Reed stayed beside the sheriff's cruiser while Harlan opened the gate. Then he saw her. Marin stood near the feed shed with her sleeves pushed up, hair tied back in a rough knot, Biscuit and Rue lying in a wooden box near her feet. She looked smaller from that distance, but not weaker. When she lifted her head and saw Reed by the fence, the guarded fire from the roadside flickered once beneath the exhaustion on her face. Reed did not step toward her. He only stood on the other side of the gate, Elise's letter warm against his chest, while the wind moved through the wet grass before the storm. Wade Bellamy came out of the farmhouse before Sheriff Harlan had shut his cruiser door. His face had lost some of the injured patience from the night before, but he still carried himself like the yard belonged to him, the weather belonged to him, and every person standing inside the fence had arrived there by his permission. The wind pressed his shirt against his chest as he looked past the sheriff and fixed on Reed. What is he doing here? Sheriff Harlan closed the cruiser door with one hand. "I need to speak with Marin." "You spoke with her yesterday." "I spoke with everyone yesterday." Wade gave a short laugh without humor. "She's home now. Dogs are home. Family matters settled." Marin stood near the feed shed, with Biscuit and Rue in the wooden box beside her boots. She had dirt on one forearm, hay caught at the edge of her dress, and the tired stillness of someone who had slept but not rested. When Biscuit saw Reed through the fence, he put both paws on the side of the box and tried to climb out. Rue lifted her head more slowly. Then her tail began to move. Marin put one hand on the box to hold them back, but her fingers trembled against the wood. She looked at Sheriff Harlan, then at Wade, then at Reed, standing beyond the gate with his hands empty. Something in her face tried to harden and could not hold. The sheriff opened the gate. Marin Bell. Wade turned sharply. "Sheriff, she doesn't need another round of questioning. I'm asking her." Harlan's voice stayed low, but this time it had a locked door in it. "Not you." The young deputy moved to the side of the cruiser and waited there, close enough to matter. Wade noticed. His jaw worked once before he stepped back. Marin did not move. For a moment, the farm seemed ready to take her answer before she could give it. The feed shed, the broken fence wire, the old kennel roof, bending under years of rain and sun, all of it stood around her like witnesses that had never spoken for her before. Reed reached into the truck and took out the thin jacket she had left behind. He walked only as far as the gate and laid it across the top rail. "Tell the truth," he said quietly. "I'm right here." He did not say more. Marin looked at the jacket. She looked at Biscuit, who had one back leg stuck over the box and no sense of timing, and at Rue, who was watching her with both ears low. Then she lifted her eyes to the sheriff. "I'm 21. Wade exhaled through his nose. "Marin?" The deputy took one step forward. "Let her finish." Marin swallowed. "I left because I wanted to leave. Reed didn't take me. He didn't keep me. He gave me a room with a lock and said I could call the sheriff if I needed to." Sheriff Harlan nodded once. "Did you want to come back here last night?" Her mouth opened, then closed. Wade's voice dropped into the old softness. "Careful what you say, honey. You're upset. You've always gotten confused when people fill your head." Marin flinched. Reed saw it and did nothing but stand there. That was harder than stepping forward. She turned toward Wade. "I'm not confused. Marin, you keep saying that like my name belongs to you." The yard went still. Wade's face reddened. "After everything I've done for you? You didn't raise me like family," she said. Her voice shook, but it stayed alive. "You used me like help you didn't have to pay." Wade stepped toward her, then stopped when Harlan shifted between them. Marin looked down at the puppies. Biscuit had finally tumbled out of the box and landed in the dirt with a soft grunt. Rue followed, smaller and neater. Then both of them ran toward the gate as if every court in the world had already ruled in their favor. "They're alive because I fed them," Marin said. "Because I hid them when he said weak ones weren't worth the cost." Wade's hands curled at his sides. "Those dogs were born on my land." "So was I almost," she said. "That didn't make me yours." No one spoke for several seconds. The wind moved through the high grass and lifted the edge of Marin's dress. Somewhere behind the shed, a loose strip of tin clicked against a nail. Biscuit reached Reed first and circled his boot with frantic joy, while Rue stood on his shoe and looked up as though demanding to be recognized. Sheriff Harlan opened the folder he had brought from the cruiser. "Mr. Bellamy, the guardianship paperwork you showed me applied when Marin was a minor. She isn't a minor now. She's not thinking straight." She answered straight enough. Harlan looked toward the kennel row, then at the receipts Reed had placed in the folder that morning. "I'll have animal control come take a look at the dogs and the setup. You can discuss property questions through the proper channels, but you are not taking an adult woman anywhere. She says she doesn't want to go." Wade stared at Marin, as if waiting for the old fear to return and fix what had broken. It did not. Marin picked up her small bag from beside the shed. She did not run, and she did not make a speech. She walked past Wade with Rue in her arms and Biscuit bouncing around Reed's boots, and she crossed through the gate without asking anyone to open it wider. On the drive back, a short storm finally broke over the valley. Rain tapped the windshield in clean, steady lines. Marin sat in the back seat with both puppies asleep across her lap, one hand resting over them, as if counting each breath. For a long time, she watched the wet fields pass without speaking. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she said. Reed kept his eyes on the road. "You said something like that a few days ago. That's not helpful." "No." He turned the wipers up one notch. "But it sounds less like a sentence now." Marin looked down at the puppies. "What does it sound like?" "A question." She leaned her head back against the seat, too tired to argue. The corner of her mouth moved anyway. The house greeted them with damp wood, yellow kitchen light, and 2 empty bowls waiting under the counter. Biscuit ran to them like he had been away for years. Rue stole the towel beside the sink before Marin had even set her bag down. Reed hung Marin's jacket near the door beside his own. Then he took Elise's letter from his shirt pocket and laid it on the kitchen table, instead of hiding it away. In the days that followed, Marin started a few shifts at the feed store in town. She bought Biscuit and Rue their first bag of food with money she had earned herself and kept the receipt folded in her wallet. Reed repaired the back fence again, though Rue still found one gap small enough to make victory look accidental. Elise's room did not disappear. Reed still kept her photographs. He still paused outside the door on certain evenings. But the door no longer stayed closed all day, and when Marin set a new basil pot on the kitchen windowsill, Reed opened the window so the light could reach it. One clear morning after rain, Reed stood on the porch with coffee in his hand, while Biscuit slept inside one boot and Rue dragged a towel across the boards like a prize. Marin came out with her hair still loose from sleep and looked toward the road, now drying in the sun. "When you decide where you want to go," Reed said, "I'll drive you." Marin watched the puppies, then the road, then the house behind them. "Maybe I'll decide after breakfast." Reed did not smile much. He only looked at the open door, the lit kitchen, and the small green leaves lifting from the windowsill. For the first time in a long while, coming home did not feel like returning to what was gone. It felt like letting the living in. I keep thinking about that kitchen after everyone came home. Not the big confrontation at the farm, not the sheriff's papers, just the small things. The puppy bowl sliding across the floor, Rue stealing a towel, Biscuit asleep in Reed's boot, and Elise's letter lying on the table where it could finally breathe. There is something honest about a house learning to make room again. Grief does not leave all at once. Fear does not disappear because someone says the right words. But sometimes a locked door opens a little, a person speaks one brave sentence, and breakfast feels like enough reason to stay one more morning. Reed did not save Marin by owning her future. He gave her space to choose it, and Marin did not heal him by replacing anyone he lost. She simply brought life back into rooms that had forgotten the sound of it. The people in this story are imagined, but the loneliness, loyalty, control, courage, and quiet kindness inside it come from things many families know too well. May God bless every person who is trying to begin again, especially those doing it quietly. I would be grateful to hear your thoughts, memories, or prayers in the comments. And if stories like this mean something to you, please like and subscribe. Some mornings, grace looks like sunlight on a kitchen window and one more bowl set out for someone who came home.